Ja, ich begrüße euch
Hello and
ganz
welcome
herzlich
to my
heute hier
first
zu meiner
episode
ersten
of
Folge
About Hauptwerk.
About Hauptwerk.
My name is
Mein
Christoph
Name ist
Keller,
Christoph
and
Keller
About
und
Hauptwerk
About
is a new
Hauptwerk ist
video
eine neue
series that I have
Videoreihe,
been
die
planning
ich
for
schon seit
years,
Jahren plane, in
in
der
which
ich
I want to
Samples
present sample
vorstellen will
sets on the
zum
topic
Thema
of
Hauptwerk
Hauptwerk,
und wo
and
es auch darum
also
geht, ein
talk a
bisschen
little
zur
bit about the
technischen
technical side of things.
Seite zu
What
sagen,
happens in the
was also der
computer,
Computer,
how to
wie
operate
kann man Hauptwerk
Hauptwerk,
bedienen
and so
und so
on and
weiter und
so
so fort.
forth.
Also
The broad
ein
field,
weites
as
Feld,
you
das
all
wisst ihr
know,
alle selber.
and I have
Und
decided to
wo man
provide
dann
you with some
in die eine
in-depth
oder andere
information
Richtung
in
hier
one
ein bisschen
direction
vertiefte
or another.
Informationen für euch bereitzustellen. Das erste
I
Video
would like to
will
dedicate
ich
this
gern
first
ein
video to a
Sample-Set
sample
widmen,
set that I
das
have
mir in
been
letzter Zeit
particularly
ganz
fond of
besonders
lately.
angetan hat.
It is
Und
about the
dabei
Eule
geht es
organ
um
in
die
the
Eule-Orgel in der
Mercatorhalle in
Mercatorhalle
Duisburg.
in Duisburg.
Duisburg is
liegt im
located in the
Ruhrpott
Ruhr area,
und
Rhineland, and has created
hat
an
mit
important cultural
der
center there
Mercatorhalle
with the Mercatorhalle.
einen
The Mercatorhalle
wesentlichen Vorreiter
itself is
gefunden oder
located in the
geschaffen. Die
so-called City
Mercatorhalle selber
Palais,
befindet sich
which
im
was built
sogenannten
in
City Palais.
2007.
Das wurde 2007 erst gebaut. Das
It is
ist
a
ein
large
großer
complex with a
Komplex
shopping mall,
mit
boutiques, doctors'
Einkaufsmall
offices,
und
and so on. A truly
ich
huge
denke
center in
Arztpraxen.
Duisburg.
Also das ist so wirklich ein Riesenzentrum in Duisburg.
And
Und
integrated
dort
into this City
in diesem
Palais
City
is the
Palais
Mercatorhalle.
integriert ist die Mercatorhalle.
The
Die
Mercatorhalle has two
hat
concert
zwei
halls, one
Konzertsäle,
large
einen
and one
großen und
small.
einen kleinen. Der
The large
große
hall can
fasst
accommodate
ca.
around
1800
1,800 people
Leute
and has the
und hat die
advantage
Eigenschaft,
of
dass er
being
akustisch
acoustically
variabel
variable.
ist. Man kann
This
also in
means that the
diesem
Saal
tatsächlich
reverberation
die
characteristics in this hall
Nachhallcharakteristik
can be
einstellen,
adjusted using
mittels
curtains
Vorhängen
and
und
various
verschiedenen
wall elements.
Wandelementen und dort
In
hinein hat die
2009,
Eule
Orgelbau
aus
Eule from Bautzen built a
2009
concert hall organ
eine
there.
Konzertsaalorgel gebaut. Die
The
Orgel
organ is
selber ist
dedicated to
im
the
englischen
English Romantic
romantischen
style
Stil
or
beziehungsweise
English symphonic music
der englischen Symphonik verschrieben und
and is based on
angelehnt an
two
die
town hall
zwei
organs, both of which are
Townhall-Orgeln, die
located
wir
in
beide in
Scotland.
Schottland finden. Das eine
One
ist
is the organ by Harrison and
die Orgel
Harrison
von
from
Harrison and
1923
Harrison
in
von
Dundee,
1923 in Dundee.
and the
Und
other
die
is in
andere
Edinburgh,
steht
built
in
there in
Edinburgh,
1913 by Norman
dort
and Beard.
gebaut 1913 von Norman and Beard.
I have included links to information about these organs in the video description below so that you can take a look at them.
Werde ich unten euch anmerken, sodass ihr euch die Orgeln dort mal ansehen könnt. Es lohnt sich wirklich.
It is really worth taking a look at these organs, because some of the features of their stop list and the constellation of their divisions have been incorporated very, very well into the organ in the Mercatorhalle.
Gut übernommen nochmal in der Orgel in der Mercatorhalle.
It should be noted that this was obviously not a matter of just alluding to English organ symphonic, but that is in fact English organ symphonic. It is fair to say that although this organ is located in Germany, it is perfectly suited to performing British organ music. And, at least at the time of its construction, the organ inspired the magazine Organ to award a prize to the organ builder Eule. The reason given was, with its unique town hall organ for the Duisburg Philharmonic, the organ building company is setting standards for future hall organ building in Germany. In addition, the high standards of craftsmanship and organ building technology of this traditional company were decisive factors. Orgelbau Eule was named Organ Builder of the Year 2009 because of this instrument, and I can understand why. As a Hauptwerk user, I am naturally delighted that the organ is now available as a sample set for Hauptwerk from the company Pipeloops here in Germany. I'll say it right away, this organ cannot be compared to any other organ. It is very unique and special if only because of its acoustics.
Es ist eine Saalorgel, es ist keine Kirchenorgel.
It is a
es ist
concert
eine
organ,
Saalorgel
not a
oder
church
Kirchenorgel.
organ,
Teils
and the
klingt
acoustics
entsprechend
are correspondingly dry
zurückgenommen
and
mit.
subdued.
Zum
Perhaps
Sampleset
I should
selber
mention the
vielleicht
sample
vorweg.
set itself
Es
first.
gab 3
There were
Mikrofonierungen,
3 microphone
sodass man
placements,
eine wirkliche Surround-Version
so
davon
you have a
hat,
real surround version
die man
that you
nutzen
can
kann,
use
soweit
if your
man
Hauptwerk installation at home
mit
is
seiner
equipped to
Installation
listen
von
on
Hauptwerk zu
multiple
Hause damit
speaker
ausgestattet
levels.
ist, auf mehreren Lautsprecherebenen abhören zu können.
The organ has
72
72
Register,
stops, including 6
wovon
transmissions and 6
dann
extensions in the pedal.
jeweils 6
That means there are
Transmissionen
actually
existieren
60
im
pipe
Total
rows,
und
plus 6 extensions and
Extensionen.
6
Das heißt also,
transmissions,
es gibt tatsächlich 60 Pfeifenreihen
making a
plus
total
6
of
Extensionen und
72
6
stops.
Transmissionen macht 72 Register. Ich
I
habe mir
also
die
googled
Orgel
the organ
so ein
and
bisschen
noticed that there are
gegoogelt und da
actually
ist mir
very few
aufgefallen,
recordings of it.
es gibt eigentlich kaum Aufnahmen davon. Also
At least
zumindest
there are
für die
hardly any
Fachorganisten,
organists
die
who have
dieses
used this instrument
Instrument
for
bis jetzt
YouTube
eben
recordings, for
für
example.
YouTube-Aufnahmen genutzt
There
haben.
is a concert
Es gibt eine
series, but it is
Konzertreihe, die ist
relatively,
allerdings
how shall I
relativ
put it? The series lasts a very
sozusagen
long
dahingehend sehr
time,
lange,
over
bald
2
2 Jahre.
years,
Und
and
dann
then
gibt es,
there
ich
are,
weiß nicht,
I don't
4 oder
know,
5
4 or
Konzerte.
5 concerts. And I
Vielleicht
couldn't
eine
really find a CD
CD-Aufnahme
recording
haben wir auch nicht
either,
gefunden, bis auf
except
die
for the one
eine
from the
von
inauguration
der
back then.
Einweihung damals.
I
Ist ein
find
bisschen
that a bit
kurios, weil das
strange
Instrument
because the
wirklich
instrument is
interessant
really
ist. Ich habe
interesting.
keine
I have
Ahnung,
no
warum es so
idea
ist,
why that
aber
is,
vielleicht
but maybe
ist
the
er jetzt
organ will
mit
become a bit
Sample-Set
better
ein
known
bisschen
now with
bekannter,
this sample set,
weil
because it
es
really is a
wirklich
very
eine
beautiful
sehr schöne
organ.
Orgel ist. Also
I
ich
think it's
finde
fantastic,
fantastisch,
really
wirklich fantastisch
fantastically
umgesetzt
implemented
von
by
Eule.
Eule.
Hört euch auch
Listen
die
to the original
Originalaufnahmen an von
recordings
den
of the
Orgeln,
organs that served as
die
models in
Vorbild
Edinburgh
waren in Edinburgh
and Dundee
und
in
in
Scotland.
Dundee in Schottland.
You'll
Ihr werdet
notice that the
merken,
sound isn't
der
very
Klang
different.
ist nicht sehr viel anders. Ja,
Yes,
das war's zum
that's it for
Start
the start of this video,
dieses Video. Und
and I
ich
hope you
wünsche euch
enjoy
ganz
my
viel Spaß
presentation of this
mit
sample
meiner
set.
Präsentation dieses Sample-Sets.
Before I introduce you to the organ in terms of its stop list and sound, let's take a look at the user interface as it appears in the Hauptwerk software.
In der Hauptwerk-Software uns ansichtig wird. Und zwar haben wir hier
Here we have 7 tabs,
und auf dem ersten haben wir wie immer natürlich
and the first one
unseren Spieltisch
shows the
abgebildet.
console, as usual. As you can see from the transition with the photos, we don't have a graphic reproduction of the console here, but a photographic image that appears very detailed and natural. Everything is here, just like on the console in Duisburg.
Also ist hier alles da, was auch auf dem Spieltisch in Duisburg vorhanden ist.
And of course, we can also take a quick look at how the divisions are arranged. In addition to the pedal and the grate on the first keyboard, the second keyboard combines the choir and the orchestral, both of which are located in the same swell box. These are also controlled together via the first swell pedal. On the third keyboard, we have the swell. This is controlled by the second swell pedal here, and on the fourth, we have the solo division, which can also be swelled with the third swell pedal. So basically, we have 4 sections on 3 keyboards, all of which can be swelled. Of course, it's a lot of fun to play symphonic pieces with these dynamic possibilities. Then we have a crescendo roller here, and this is quite funny. When you switch it on and operate the roller, You can see the little indicator lights here as the stops are gradually switched on. I sometimes miss this feature in other sample sets with rollers, where you can't see the stops being switched on. I've definitely experienced this before. You hear the sound of the stops being switched on, but you can't see which ones are actually active. This also works on the touch screens, which we'll come to in a moment. But before we look at the touchscreen tabs, a quick word about the storage space required by the sample set. Here you can see 86.4 gigabytes of free RAM. This is because my Mac has 128 gigabytes of RAM. The operating system and other active software regularly require around 4 gigabytes. In this case, of course, Hauptwerk itself is also included, and if 86.4 gigabytes remain, then we are looking at around 38 gigabytes required for the sample set. However, this is in 24-bit resolution with all 3 surround channels and of course with all release samples available. This is a bit tight on a Mac with 32 gigabytes, but the set should load without any problems on a computer with 64 gigabytes RAM. With 72 stops, this is still relatively manageable, which is of course due to the short reverberation tails. Because we are dealing with a hall organ here and not a cathedral organ, which requires considerably more memory with 6 seconds of reverberation. Yes, this is the first page. I think this is a very nice representation of the original console in Duisburg. Then on the next tab we have the touchscreen system here in a very clear layout with very nice large buttons that are also labeled, so that I, at my advanced age and with glasses, I can read everything perfectly. That's not necessarily the case with every sample set. Above all, we also have very good contrast here. That means we have light-colored text on a dark background and not, for example, white text on a yellow background or yellow text on a beige background. These are the kinds of things that regularly drive me crazy. But anyway, that's not the case here. We have a very clear, color-coordinated touchscreen that is absolutely functional and very easy to use. This is the version for one touchscreen, and then we also have a division into links with pedal, great and orchestral for a left touchscreen, and choir, swell and solo for a right touchscreen, or vice versa if you have 2 touchscreens installed on your console. Okay, now I want to briefly mention a few minor details that are quite interesting. First, as I just mentioned, the orchestral is located together with the choir in a swell box, and both works are normally played on the second keyboard, but you also have the option of playing the orchestral stops from the fourth keyboard using the coupler up here. Which is great if, for example, you want a soft string registration here and want to play a solo registration on the choir, perhaps from a selection from the choir and the coupled swell. Then you can still play the orchestral division on the fourth keyboard. Excellent. And thinking a little further ahead, I think it's very good they've also thought ahead with the tuba. I'll introduce it to you in detail later, of course. The tuba sonora is available even when it's solo in every division or on every keyboard. Here, of course, on the solo, then in the swell, in the choir on the second keyboard, and then on the grate, and, of course, down here on the pedal. This means that the tuba can be played independently of all registrations from any keyboard, just as you wish. I think that's really great. Things like having the tuba only on the second keyboard, or only on the fourth, or only on the first are very limiting. You don't have those limitations here. You have the flexibility to use the tuba in a wide variety of places. Here too, for example, solo in the pedal. When it comes to playing a really powerful pedal part that really needs to come to the fore, well, then we also have the Vox Striges here. This is a little joke by the organ builder Eule. When you pull the Vox Striges, a little wooden owl appears at the front of the organ facade and makes an owl call. I looked it up. Striges is the Latin word for owl, but it can also mean barn owl. Perhaps it is a bit of self-irony that organ builder Eule installed this stop here. In any case, it is funny. I will show it to you with the video that forms the basis for the animation above, enlarged a little in the middle so that you can really see what is happening. The Vox Striges . Yes, it's funny, and certainly quite nice for the audience in the hall when the owl appears. Perhaps it's also a welcome idea for lectures or for politicians giving speeches up front or something. I don't know. In any case, I'm sure there will be uses for it. Let's move on to the fifth tab on the control page. Here we first have the option of slightly detuning the labial and reed stops, which I have also gently increased here. I quite like using this. I prefer a slight detuning in the organ, which makes the whole thing sound a bit livelier and more natural, rather than having the organ tuned 100% cleanly, which sounds rather sterile. That's not really nice and doesn't actually correspond to the natural conditions of a pipe organ in a room, which is usually problematic in terms of climate anyway. Who has ever played a 100% clearly tuned pipe organ in their life? Here we can also adjust how loud the blower should be heard, or the rattling of the tremulants in the wind tunnel. If you like that, you can turn it up here. I don't really like it that much, so I have the blower set very quietly. In any case, it's easy to adjust this to your own taste. It's also less work than editing and adjusting it in the rank routing. Then, of course, we also have an audio mixer here. As I said, we have a sound output here with 3 stereo pairs. One with the first microphone placement at the very front of the stage, at the level of the organ. This provides a relatively direct sound of the organ. The second pair of microphones was located in the auditorium at the level of the first row of chairs. Here, of course, we also have a relatively direct sound, but also a fair amount of room ambience. And the third stereo pair was located at the back of the hall, so that only the indirect room acoustics were captured here. Nevertheless, it is a hall, not a church. So it's not that you have a lot of room reverberation here at the back, but of course it's not longer at the back than at the front. It's just that it's naturally stronger there. So here, if you use 3 stereo pairs in Hauptwerk, one at the front, one in the middle, and one at the back, you can make excellent use of this and get a very, very natural spatial sound. Overall, I think that Pipeloops has done a very professional job with the microphones here, and I really enjoy playing the organ on my surround sound system. It really feels like you're sitting in that hall. I wouldn't recommend turning all 3 surround channels up to full volume, because that's not what you really want to hear. You have to grade it a little, and I would also advise against it if you don't have 6 speakers, but only 4, or even just 2 in the case of stereo. Perhaps limit yourself to the one in the middle. Then you'll have a direct sound with a pleasant room reverberation. It actually sounds quite organic then. The front one alone is a bit dry, and the rear one alone is a bit too washed out, of course. It's a matter of taste. Maybe some people only want to hear that one, possible. But for sound reasons, I would definitely advise against loading all 3 if you have only 2 speakers. Then we have these 4 control buttons. First, there's the second touch. Some of you may be familiar with this from theater organs, while others may not. Second touch means that you can make additional stops sound by pressing the key again while holding it down. This can be a coupler to a solo division, for example, but it can also be a percussion instrument, such as a timpani or a cymbal, depending on what is available on theater organs. So it's actually more of an effect. Or you can use your thumb to play a counter melody to the chords with a stronger touch in your left hand, while your right hand does something completely different. That works too. I couldn't use or try this out here because I don't have a touch-sensitive keyboard. Hauptwerk only represents second touch via touch sensitivity. There is no other option, and if you don't have a velocity-sensitive keyboard, you can't use it, of course. To be honest, it wouldn't really be interesting for me on the organ either, because the foundation for a second touch simply isn't there. I really see the second touch being used on prescriptions and effect sounds, and that's how it's actually used on the organ. And that's not really implemented here with this symphonic organ stop list.
Then we have a pedal pizzicato here.
This ensures that on 3 stops in the pedal, namely Violone 16, Geigen 16 and Bourdon 16, the note is not held even when the pedal is held down, but is only plucked or bowed briefly and then disappears again immediately, while all the other stops that are drawn in continue to sound. This can ensure that you have an accent on every note in legato lines. This is also a popular feature of the theater organ, and that's all I'm going to reveal for now. You'll hear it in the end credits. If I plan it correctly, and if I succeed, we'll definitely have this pedal pizzicato in the performance at the end of the video. At the same time, and this is obvious, the 2 32-foot stops will be deactivated with a pizzicato, because it wouldn't make much sense tonally. Yes, then we have one last button here on the control page. This is the swell coupler. This switching device ensures that the 3 swell pedals can be operated with just one pedal. This means that when I press the left swell pedal here, the other 2 follow suit. This is quite useful if you have thin feet and cannot press 3 swell pedals with one foot. It is a very practical feature. I have a suggestion for Pipeloops here, perhaps for an update.
I would like to see this button remain here, but at least also be represented here on the stop pages.
Perhaps here at the crescendo or down here, so that it is also available for those who only have one touchscreen and don't have to change pages because of this one button.
So that would be one point, that the button moves here or at least is also placed here. And the second point would be that it is also saved in the setter combinations with its respective status. Because if you already have a great setter system like in Hauptwerk and just keep stepping, then it's actually always a bit unpleasant when such playing aids have to be operated separately. The convenience lies precisely in the fact that you only have one setter piston, which you can use to continue stepping ahead and keep your hands free. At most, you would have to set up a foot pedal for it, but none of that is really practical. So, I would like to see the button here with a swell coupler also available for the stops. Yes, and last but not least, we have the option of saving our settings to 5 memory locations, and then of course recalling them as needed. This concludes our overview of the user interface of this sample set. And now we come to the sound presentation of this organ and the introduction of the stop list.
I am very pleased to now come to the main part of this video, where I would like to introduce you to the organ in the Mercator Hall in Duisburg. Naturally also in terms of sound, or rather what this sample set from Pipeloops transports from this organ into your own home. The original organ has 4 keyboards. This fits in quite well with my own console here at home, so that I was able to replicate the original keyboard layout here. I have 48 stop tabs on the left and right, labeled, which I can swap out depending on the organ. All of the organ stops have found a place on these 2 sides. That's enough. Even though there are 72 stops with all the couplers and all the playing aids, such as tremulants and so on. The pedal couplers didn't fit on it. That's why they are stored here on the left in a drawer, where I have another 18 stop tabs. And even more operating aids for Hauptwerk, for the software itself and the display, as you can see here. Well, let's move on to the stops. I've already shown you the user interface, so as I said, we have the grate on the first keyboard. Then we have the orchestral and choir divisions together on the second keyboard, the swell on the third, and the solo division on the fourth. I would say that first we should focus on the heart of every organ, that is the 8 principles, especially in the grate. And here we see what is, of course, extremely important in the English symphonic style, namely that we have 3 open diapasons here. 1, 2, and 3. This is also very well done here. I have often found that these 3 diapasons sound quite similar. There is one view that they simply differ in volume or strength, with the third being the quietest and the first, of course, the strongest.
But there is also, of course, the approach of diversifying these 3 principles somewhat more clearly in terms of intonation. This means that our first open diapason here sounds very clearly like an English 8-foot principle. The second one recedes somewhat, but in terms of intonation it has more of a horn character, so it is somewhat darker.
And the third one clearly leans towards strings. Of course, it gets interesting when you combine all three, because then you get a principal foundation that really packs a punch in terms of carrying power. I'll take that together with the pedal and the coupler great to pedal. So it's very well-rounded, very beautiful in tone, and in my opinion, excellently tuned in this acoustics. And of course it delivers both in the plenum and in smaller registrations, where, for example, the strings are used also in the orchestral set, which adds the orchestra strings and the strings from the swell, creating an incredibly good foundation. And then let's listen to the whole thing again, with the entire plenum of the great played with the usual stops. We then add the octave 4, the fifth, the super octave, and the mixture, which incidentally is a third mixture in the English tradition. What we hear here is a very clean, beautiful, clear plenum that can also be used for Baroque music.
Only the small plenum with a contraposaune in the pedal. I think it's wonderful. So, a nice plenary session. That brings me to a little digression. What is a sample set actually good for? For me personally, one thing is that you can play at home, that you can play different literature, different eras faithfully, that you can enjoy it yourself. But I also find Hauptwerk fantastic for practicing, especially if you have a console that is ergonomically built and you can really play and practice comfortably for hours. And I have to say that this organ here, this sample set, is excellent for practicing, because it doesn't have a huge spatial sound or a huge reverb, but rather a very clearly defined sound where you can hear every little detail and everything you practice very precisely. So I really like that about it. Let's move on to the choir. The choir is relatively restrained in design. We also have a violin diapason there. Which corresponds to the third open diapason in the great.
wonderfully coordinated. A Clarabella 8. So a light string flute. Then of course a real string, the Dulciana 8. I'll start that with the swell pedal closed. It goes very well with a corps de nuit, of course. I think these stops have a lot of character, that a lot of heart and soul has gone into the intonation. You can simply hear and feel that when you play the organ. I'll say it again. Even the sound of this hall, as captured by Pipeloops microphones, comes across excellently. We also have a flauto traverso in the choir, an overblown flute 4.
Yes, indeed, Flageolet 2. It's not really necessary to demonstrate every single stop. What I find interesting is to show individual groups, or the way the stops blend together. What's also important here is the Dulciana mixture. That's very interesting. Because of course we also have a third in there, a fifth and the octave. And that comes in, yes, I'll call it the small plenum in the choir. It's very beautiful. So it's not overly bright or overly loud, but it really blends in very well with this English orchestral sound. Of course, the clarinet in the choir as a solo stop is a must. It has one small disadvantage, which I find a little bit pity: the clarinet. There is no tremulant. Yes, the tremulant on the second keyboard only affects the orchestral, not the choir voices. That's why this clarinet, unfortunately, doesn't have a tremulant. A bit pity. Perhaps that could have been taken into account when designing the instrument.
On the other hand, the tremulant is of course available in the orchestral division for the orchestral oboe. We'll now listen to it with the tremulant. We also have a chœur anglais in the orchestral division. First, without the tremulant. And these two voices, orchestral oboe and chœur anglais in the orchestral division, together with the tremulant on the second keyboard, open up possibilities for very unique, pale and very interesting sounds. Well, I find it very, very appealing what you can do with these two reed stops for special effects. For example, when you need a 16-foot or a reed in the pedal that works very quietly with strings, which is, of course, a great thing.
Then we come to the strings here in the orchestral. I find them very impressive. First, we have a viol d'orchestre. Naturally, with a corresponding beat, the viol céleste. The viol octaviante for you can already tell that it will be very interesting when the 16-foot is added. I'll do that. I'll couple it to the pedal. And now, to top it all off, the cornet de viol, 3 ranks.
What I find really interesting and appealing now are the orchestral subcouplers and also the supercouplers. And then, of course, it's best to add the 32-foot Kontraviolone. With this registration at the latest, I have to say that I am truly delighted with this organ. It does happen from time to time that you have a few more strings, but the way it is done here, this orchestral division really deserves its name. So that is very convincing. Let's move on to the swell. The swell is quite traditional, but here too there are a few more strings. The reeds are normally occupied. Here too, of course, the open diapason is a must. If you now compare the three principles of swell, choir and grade, you can really hear how everything is coordinated in terms of voicing in the English style. They didn't go down the route of saying, okay, we have a French swell, then we have a kind of mixed positive or choir, and the grade which has to be able to do everything. No. It's really the case here that the organ is truly a full-blooded English organ. It would be suitable for both a town hall and a cathedral. Of course, you could also put it in a large church as it is, and that would not be a problem at all. In this hall, you have the advantage of being able to hear this English symphonic sound world very clearly and distinctly, which is really well done. Of course, we also have a salicional in the swell, with Vox Angelica as the beat. And another very rare instrument is the keraulophone, a bowed flute. It's a cross between a flute and a string instrument. It goes very well with the other two, of course. Yes, then we also have flutes 8 and 4, of course. And a piccolo too. And what I really like about the organ is the very convincing plenum with the reeds. We have 4 reeds here. Contrabassoon 16, which is also transmitted in the pedal as bassoon 16, then a cornopian 8 and a clairon 4. Let's try that again with the pedal. Absolutely convincing. But here too there is a subcoupler and a supercoupler. Very nice. And perhaps also briefly presented on its own the cornopian, which is quite different from a French trompette. It is a very round, dark sound that this swell organ reed offers here, the cornopian. I can only repeat it again, typically English. Finally, let's move on to the solo. We now have 3 labial voices. First, a harmonic claribel, which, like all other stops in the solo, is set to a higher wind pressure. A similar stop, the concert flute 4, also overblown, of course. While we're at it, the organ really does have a 5-octave keyboard range, so it doesn't stop at G or A, but really sounds up to C, which means you can really play English music on it. We have a French horn, really an English typical French horn. Compared to the cornopian, even darker, even warmer. And we have a vox humana, which I would rather call voix humaine, because it really goes in the French direction. Very expressive and very lively, of course, together with a tremulant. And then we have 2 wonderful solo stops on this division. One is the Mercator trumpet, the high-pressure trumpet. In comparison, the trumpet in the great, the tromba, This trumpet is also located in the swell box of the solo division, that we can really bring it to the background. Unlike the last stop in the solo, the tuba sonora, there is also the tuba mirabilis or the tuba episcopalis. There are many different tubas, but basically they all have one thing in common. They are the crowning solo stop of an English organ.
This means that with this, a solo voice can really be played above a plenum, which is why it has a higher, significantly higher wind pressure. In some cases, this can be as high as 500 or 800 millimeters. Let's listen to how it sounds here. Also in comparison with the tromba in the great. Of course, the tuba is not in the swell box. It is outside, so it cannot be swelled. Nevertheless, we have the option here of combining the Mercator trumpet with the tuba sonora. And that in turn is a great effect when you take back the trumpet in the swell and then open the swell together with the tuba. Well, what I forgot to mention is of course also very important. In addition to the other stops we have just heard, we also have a 5-rank cornet in the great, which I think sounds also beautiful. And the cornet really reaches up to G or even F, and then it's over. So you have a wonderfully developed cornet here. That would basically be it. Perhaps a word about the reeds in the pedal. There are a large number of them here, so to speak. We have the bassoon 16 here. This is a transmission from the swell, from the contrabassoon there. We have a contraposaune 16. And we have, which is of course great, an Ophikleide 16, which is the actual 16-foot reed in England. And that in turn is available as a 32 feet. However, I am now used to the Ophikleide being a little stronger. So this one is rather restrained compared to the contraposaune.
But I don't want to criticize that now. That is, of course, a decision made by the organ builder. Basically, you could say that these reeds here in the pedal sound excellent. And that you can actually play everything that matters with them. Finally, I want to show you how the tuba works, how the tuba stands out in the plenum, sounding together with the Mercator trumpet. We now have the plenum here, as you can see. I'll switch it over again briefly. With the Ophokleide 16 in the pedal and the tromba in the grate. Plus all the strings. You wouldn't believe it. You can really hear that they're there. The strings give the whole plenum an additional boost of presence and a certain ethereal character. Yes, and now we'll play the tuba sonora and the Mercator trumpet from the solo division to the entire reed section of the swell. With that, I'll say goodbye for now to the presentation of this sample set from Pipeloops. And we'll see each other again at the end, where I'll draw a little conclusion with what else there is to say about the instrument and the sample set. But now, on to the end of the sound presentation and a little something with the tuba sonora and Mercator trumpet.
Well, that brings us to the end of this first episode of About Hauptwerk. In the future, in this series about Hauptwerk, I will introduce further sample sets, as well as describe various technical details of the Hauptwerk software. I dedicated this first video to the Eule organ at the Mercatorhalle in Duisburg. I thought this organ was very fitting for the start of my series because it is simply a special sample set. The Eule organ set is available from the producer Pipeloops and normally costs 500 euros. Currently, the price is reduced by 20% as part of a Christmas promotion that Pipeloops is running until January 6, 2026, I believe. However, all other sample sets are also reduced by 20%. It's definitely worth taking a look at this producer's range. Personally, I think the price for the sample set is more than reasonable. Based on a comparison with about 80 sample sets, this sample set is one of those that are really excellently produced. The samples themselves are very, very cleanly edited. The sound of the organ and also the sound of the room are extraordinarily well captured. As I clarified before, the organ really does offer a great English and symphonic sound. I really enjoy playing the sample set, so for me, it's one of my favorites, I have to say. And that brings us to the end. I've said everything. Wait a minute. I just heard that I made a mistake, or an omission. I forgot one stop of the organ. That's the carillon in the choir. Of course, that should not be overlooked. That's why I'm adding it at the end as a kind of closing credits, so to speak. A little impression of the French carillon from the choir of the German Eule organ in the Mercatorhalle in Duisburg. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. I welcome comments below the video, and of course I also welcome suggestions or topics that you would like to see discussed in the future. And I promise you, I'll be back soon with another video on a different sample set or a technical detail of Hauptwerk. Until then, I wish you all the best and hope you have lots of fun and enjoyment with Hauptwerk, this fantastic software, and with your organs at home. See you then. Bye!